The stagecoach lurched over another deep rut in the dusty road, and Rosemary Hayes gripped the edge of her seat to keep from tumbling onto the floor. She had been traveling for 3 long weeks, leaving behind everything she had ever known in Boston. Her fingers brushed against the crinkled letter in her dress pocket, the one that had changed her entire life. Her aunt had passed away, leaving Rosemary a small boarding house in the frontier town of Silver Creek, Arizona Territory. At 24 years old, with no marriage prospects and no family left back east, she had nothing to lose and everything to gain by starting fresh. The stagecoach rolled to a stop, and the driver called out that they had arrived. Rosemary gathered her courage along with her carpet bag and stepped down onto the wooden boardwalk. The Arizona sun blazed down on her, and she immediately felt overdressed in her dark traveling gown. Silver Creek was exactly what she had imagined a frontier town would look like. A single main street stretched before her, lined with weathered wooden buildings, a general store, a blacksmith shop, a small church with a white steeple, and various other establishments created the heart of this remote community. People stopped to stare at her. She supposed she did look rather out of place with her fancy Eastern clothes and her pale complexion that had never known the kiss of the desert sun. She was trying to remember the directions from the letter when a runaway horse came charging down the street. Someone screamed. The animal was heading straight toward a small boy who stood frozen with fear in the middle of the road. Before Rosemary could even think, a tall figure launched himself from the boardwalk. A man in a worn cowboy hat grabbed the child and rolled them both to safety just as the horse thundered past. Dust billowed everywhere. When it settled, Rosemary saw the man kneeling in the dirt, checking the little boy for injuries. The man looked up, and their eyes met. Rosemary felt something shift inside her chest, something she could not explain. He had the kind of face that told a story, weathered by sun and wind, with eyes the color of a summer storm. Gray, she realized, with hints of blue around the edges. The boy's mother came running, scooping up her child with tears streaming down her face. She thanked the man over and over, calling him Mr. Callahan. He simply tipped his hat and told her it was nothing. Then he walked toward Rosemary. Her heart began to beat a little faster. You need to understand something about Wyatt Callahan. He was not the type of man who believed in love at first sight. He had seen too much hardship, experienced too much loss to believe in fairy tales. Yet something about the way this stranger stood there, looking both terrified and determined at the same time, caught his attention in a way nothing had in years. He stopped in front of her and touched the brim of his hat. His voice was deep and rough like gravel wrapped in honey. He asked if she was lost. Rosemary squared her shoulders and lifted her chin. She told him she was not lost, merely newly arrived. She was looking for the Hayes boarding house. Something flickered in his gray eyes. He told her that would be old Martha Hayes's place. He asked if she was family. She nodded. Martha was her aunt. She explained that she had inherited the boarding house. Wyatt studied her for a long moment. Then he told her he would show her the way. He said the boarding house was right next to his family's ranch, which meant they would be neighbors. As they walked together down the dusty street, Rosemary learned that Wyatt Callahan owned the largest cattle ranch in the territory. He had built it up from nothing after his father passed away 10 years ago. He lived alone now, his mother having joined his father in heaven 5 years past. Rosemary shared her own story. Her parents had died when she was young, and she had been raised by her grandmother until she too passed away. The letter from the lawyer about her aunt's inheritance had arrived just when Rosemary had nowhere else to turn. They reached the boarding house as the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. The building was larger than Rosemary had expected, 2 stories with a wide front porch and windows that faced the mountains in the distance. But her heart sank when she saw the condition of the place. Paint peeled from every surface. The porch sagged dangerously in the middle. Several windows were cracked. The garden was overgrown with weeds taller than her waist. Wyatt must have seen the disappointment on her face. He told her it just needed some work. He said his Aunt Martha had been too old and sick in her final years to keep up with the repairs. Rosemary straightened her spine. She had not traveled 3,000 miles to give up now. She thanked Wyatt for his help and said she would manage just fine. He looked at her with something like respect in his eyes. Then he told her he would stop by in the morning to see if she needed anything. That night, Rosemary slept on a dusty mattress in a room that smelled of old wood and forgotten memories. But for the first time in years, she felt like she might have finally found where she belonged. Wyatt did come by the next morning, just as he had promised, and the morning after that, and the one after that too. Always with some excuse. He needed to check if she had enough firewood. He wanted to make sure the well was working properly. He thought she might need help fixing that broken step on the porch. The townsfolk of Silver Creek began to talk. They said Wyatt Callahan had never paid this much attention to any woman. They said he had turned down every eligible lady in the territory for years. They wondered what was so special about the stranger from Boston. Rosemary pretended not to hear the whispers. She was too busy working to restore the boarding house to its former glory. She scrubbed floors and washed windows and pulled weeds until her hands were raw. She learned to cook simple meals and to mend her own clothes. The soft Eastern woman, she had been slowly transformed into something stronger, something more resilient. But here's the part that matters most. Every time Wyatt came to help her, every time their hands accidentally touched while passing a hammer or a bucket of water, Rosemary felt that same flutter in her chest. And when she looked into his gray eyes, she saw something there that mirrored her own confusing feelings. 3 months passed. The boarding house began to fill with guests. Traveling salesmen, mining prospectors, and families passing through all found their way to Rosemary's door. She discovered she had a gift for hospitality, for making strangers feel welcome and at home. Wyatt continued to find reasons to visit, though he no longer needed excuses. The whole town knew he was courting her, even if neither of them had spoken the words aloud. One evening, as they sat together on the newly repaired porch watching the sun sink behind the mountains, Wyatt finally gathered his courage. He told Rosemary there was something he needed to say to her. She turned to look at him, her heart suddenly beating so loud she was certain he could hear it. He said he was not good with pretty words. He had never been the type to make fancy speeches or write poetry. But he wanted her to know that meeting her had changed something inside him. He said his life had been empty before she arrived, just work and loneliness, and going through the motions. Now every morning he woke up excited because he knew he would see her face. Rosemary felt tears prick at her eyes. No one had ever spoken to her like this before. Wyatt took a deep breath and continued. He said he understood if she wanted more than what he could offer. He was just a simple rancher with calloused hands and a small house, but if she would have him, he would spend the rest of his days trying to make her happy. Before Rosemary could respond, the sound of an approaching horse interrupted them. A rider came galloping up the road, stopping in front of the boarding house with urgent news. There had been a terrible flood up north. A dam had broken, and dozens of families had lost their homes. They were making their way towards Silver Creek, hoping to find shelter. Rosemary and Wyatt looked at each other. Without a word, they both knew what needed to be done. Over the next few days, the town of Silver Creek came together in a way that Rosemary had never witnessed before. Her boarding house became the center of operation. She opened every room to the flood victims, giving up her own bed to sleep on a cot in the kitchen. Wyatt organized the ranchers to bring food and supplies. The women of the town cooked and sewed and cared for the children while the men helped rebuild what had been lost. Rosemary worked alongside Wyatt day and night. She saw the way he carried a sleeping child in his arms with tenderness. She watched him give his own coat to an elderly man who was shivering in the cold. She observed how he never asked for thanks or recognition, simply did what needed to be done because it was right. And she fell even more deeply in love with him. When the crisis finally passed and the families moved on to rebuild their lives, Rosemary and Wyatt found themselves alone on the porch once again. They were both exhausted, covered in dust and sweat, but something had changed between them during those difficult days. Rosemary spoke first this time. She told Wyatt that she had been thinking about what he said before they were interrupted. He looked at her with hope and fear mingled in his gray eyes. She said she had traveled across an entire country looking for a place to belong. She had thought she was searching for a home, 4 walls and a roof to call her own. But she realized now that home was not a building. Home was a person. Home was the way someone looked at you like you were the most precious thing in the world. Home was working side by side with someone you trusted with your whole heart. She told him that when she looked at him, she felt like she was home. Wyatt's face transformed with joy. He reached for her hand and held it gently, as if it were something infinitely valuable. He asked her if she was saying what he thought she was saying. Rosemary laughed, a sound of pure happiness. She told him he would have to be more specific about what he was asking. Wyatt grinned, that rare smile that completely changed his weathered face into something almost boyish. He got down on one knee right there on the porch, still covered in mud, still wearing his work clothes. He asked Rosemary Hayes if she would do him the honor of becoming his wife. She said yes before he even finished the question. The wedding took place 1 month later in the little white church with the steeple. The whole town attended. They said it was the happiest day Silver Creek had ever seen. Rosemary wore her mother's pearl necklace, the one thing she had kept from her old life. Wyatt wore a new suit that he complained about the entire morning, saying he felt like a trussed-up turkey. But when he saw his bride walking toward him down the aisle, every complaint died on his lips. The years that followed brought their share of challenges. Harsh winters and drought summers tested them. Building a family meant sleepless nights and worried days. But through it all, Rosemary and Wyatt faced everything together. The boarding house continued to welcome strangers who became friends. The ranch prospered and grew. Children came, filling their home with laughter and love. And every evening, when the work was done and the children were sleeping, Rosemary and Wyatt would sit together on the porch of their home, watching the sun set behind the mountains. Sometimes they talked about their day. Sometimes they simply held hands in comfortable silence. On those quiet evenings, Rosemary often thought about the frightened young woman who had stepped off that stagecoach so many years ago. She could never have imagined then how full her life would become. She could never have known that her greatest adventure was just beginning. The heart, she had learned, has its own kind of compass, and hers had led her exactly where she was meant to be.